the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January the 5th, 2011, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I am coming to the floor again to clear the names of two Marine pilots who crashed in Arizona April 8th of 2000. Not only two pilots, but there were 17 Marines in the back. The V-22, which is the plane that goes from a helicopter mode to a plane mode, at that time was really an experimental plane. And Major Gruber and Colonel Brow in the cockpit had no idea of what was happening when the plane went into what's called vortex ring state. And I'd like to go through this 10-year journey for the record, Mr. Speaker. It so happened that in November 2002, Major Gruber's wife, who lives in my district, Jacksonville, North Carolina, her husband, Brooks Gruber, was the co-pilot, and she wrote me a letter that I'd like to read. I contact you in hopes that leaders of integrity, free of bias, would have both the intelligence and the courage it takes to decide the facts for themselves. If you do that, you will agree that human factor pilot error findings should not stand as it is in the Marine military history. Again, I respectfully ask for your support. Please do not simply pass this matter along to General Jones without offering the support my husband and his comrades deserve. Please remember, these 19 Marines can no longer speak for themselves, and I certainly am not afraid to speak for them, and I believe someone has to, even though it's easier put to rest and forgotten. Please join me in doing the right thing by taking the time to address this important issue. But, Mr. Speaker, on March 9th of this year, The Hill magazine, and I would like to thank a new young man on the staff named Jeremy Herb, who did an article in the magazine about this 10-year journey that started with Connie Gruber's letter to me. Mr. Speaker, over the 10-year journey, I have spoken to many, many experts. One that I would like to quote today for the record is the former Assistant Secretary of Defense, Phil Coyle, and he states, Major Gruber should not be blamed for an accident caused by loss of lift due to the aircraft entering vortex ring state, a phenomena which no one in the Marine Corps adequately understood in relation to the Osprey at the time of the accident. Secretary Coyle further states, not only did the Marine Corps not understand Osprey performance under VRS, the root cause of the accident, but neither did the contractor, nor the Marine Corps had not tested the aircraft near VRS vortex ring state conditions, something which, following the accident, it later took the Marine Corps years to accomplish. Surely Major Gruber and Colonel Brow could not be blamed for something that the Marine Corps itself did not grasp until years after the accident and after the death of the 19 Marines. Considering that it was ignorance on the part of the Marine Corps that caused the April 2000 accident, the Marine Corps should make it clear to the Gruber and Brow family, with no ifs and or buts, that Gruber and Brow were not responsible for the accident. He further stated, I don't suppose the Marine Corps ever apologizes, but considering that the accident was their fault and not Major Gruber and Colonel Brow's fault, an apology to the family would be in order also. Mr. Speaker, I read that because this 10-year journey and I will continue to add names in the next few minutes of people trying to help me. These two Marines were the very best of the pilots. Major Brooks Gruber and Colonel John Brow. They gave their life for this new plane known as the V-22 Osprey. And those young Marines sitting in the back, 19, 21, 23, 24, and 25, were selected from other Marines to sit in the back of that plane. Those in the Marine leadership that calls for this mission in Arizona, or created the mission, they should join me in clearing the names of these two pilots. Mr. Speaker, I further read for the record. A former advisor to the Secretary of Defense, Rex Rivolo, stated in a letter trying to clear these names, and I read, "The failure of the manufacturer, Bell Boeing, and the Navy to characterize the slow speed, high rate of descent handling qualities of the V-22 through flight testing to describe them for the aircrew in the NATOPS and to provide an adequate warning system were the cause of the mishap, not the aircrew." Secretary Rivolo further states, "With the passing of 10 years and the future of the aircraft now secure, I sincerely hope that the names of Lieutenant Colonel Brow and Major Gruber can now be exonerated and clear for posterity. I strongly support any and all measures to this end and request this letter be included in any official record regarding the cause of the MV-22 mishap at Marana, Arizona on April the 8th, 2000, or any resolution attempting to clear the names of Lieutenant Colonel Brow and Major Gruber." Mr. Speaker, what has been so ironic about this 10-year journey of everyone that was part of reviewing the accident, or maybe was in the air like Lieutenant Colonel Jim Schaefer, who's joining this effort. Colonel Schaefer was a friend of John Brow and Brooks Gruber. And Colonel Schaefer was in a third airplane that night, a V-22. And he saw his friends and the 17 Marines in the back flip, crash, and burn. And there is no reason that the Marine Corps will not give the wives what they're asking. And I'll explain that in just a moment, Mr. Speaker. In this 10-year journey, Mr. Speaker, I've gotten to know the two attorneys, Jim Furman in Arizona, who defended the families of John Brow and Brooks Gruber before Bell Boeing. It was a major suit. And then Brian Alexander in New York, who defended the 17 families of the Marines sitting in the back of the plane. They have all joined in this effort to clear the names of John Brow and Brooks Gruber. And Mr. Speaker, what is so ironic in their effort, Jim Furman and Brian Alexander, to see the names cleared, they have given letters to the Commandant that clearly state there can be no future lawsuits. It has all been settled. There can be no more lawsuits. I must say that along this journey, at one time I had the Marine Corps to take the findings of the experts and put it into the personnel jacket of Colonel John Brow and Major Brooks Gruber. But, Mr. Speaker, I knew at that time that was not enough, because the press continues to put articles about the crash in Arizona, and they say pilot error, human factors. The Jagman report, which was the official report that was written by and signed by Colonel Mike Morgan, Colonel Ron Radish, and Major Phil Stackhouse. They were the 3 investigators sent from Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, to Arizona the day after the crash, and they were given the responsibility, Mr. Speaker, of determining what caused the crash. Mr. Speaker, in the Jagman report that I just made reference to, on page 77, those 3 men that I just named wrote this: "During this investigation, we found nothing that we would characterize as negligence or deliberate pilot error." Mr. Speaker, all the 2 wives are asking the Marine Corps is a letter from the Commandant on his stationery that clearly states, one paragraph, Lieutenant Colonel John Brown, pilot, and co-pilot Major Brooks Gruber were not at fault for the accident that occurred on April the 8th of the year 2000. Mr. Speaker, the 3 investigators have joined in this effort. And I'd like to read from retired Lieutenant Colonel Ron Radish, one of the 3 investigators that I just named. "Despite the fact procedures were not in the NATOPS for vortex ring state, there was no discussion concerning aircraft flight characteristics during high rates of descent at low air speeds. No mention was made of a possible asymmetric condition that could lead to an uncontrollable and unrecoverable situation. With no knowledge, training, or warning concerning the possible consequences of VRS, the pilots of Nighthawk 72 were essentially on their own in an uncharted territory. These 2 pilots did not know what was happening, and it was the fault of Bell Bourne and the Marine Corps." He further stated, "It was through their misfortune that the MV-22 VRS hazard was identified. Because of the accident, they learned so that nothing like this would ever happen again to a pilot." Colonel Radish further stated, "The Marana mishap of April the 8th, 2000 represents a monumental discovery that enhanced the overall safety and effectiveness of this high-capable weapon system, the V-22. May the Marines of Nighthawk 72 rest in peace, knowing that the ultimate sacrifice they made for their country also led to a critical advancement in V-22 safety and capability and overall readiness of the United States Marine Corps. My thoughts and prayers go out to the families who continue to cope with the loss of their loved ones and search for some form of closure." Mr. Speaker, I further would like to add some comments from Lieutenant Colonel Mike Morgan. Again, he was the lead investigator of this crash that happened in Arizona. And I read, "I applaud and fully support the extraordinary effort you have undertaken in support of John Brown Brooks Gruber and the families who lost loved ones in the tragic crash of Nighthawk 72. One merely needs to look at what has transpired in the years since this tragic accident. After a second MV-22 crash just 8 months later, a blue ribbon panel closely examined the MV-22 program. NAVAIR also aggressively pursued a test program to understand VRS, and develop safety measures to educate and protect future MV-22 pilots from the dangers. This was such a monumental undertaking that the lead developmental test pilot, Mr. Tom McDonald, was awarded the Society of Experimental Test Pilots Kinchler Award for outstanding professional accomplishment in the conduct of flight testing." Colonel Morgan further states, "John Brown and Brooks Gruber did their job and did it well. I look forward to the day when DOD, Department of Defense officials accurately recognize the sacrifice made by them and all the Marines of Nighthawk 72. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to read the third letter from the third investigator, Major Phil Stackhouse, states, "I do not believe that it would be a surprise to anyone that it is, in my opinion, the mishap was not a result of pilot error, but was the result of a perfect storm of circumstances. During the conduct of this investigation, we collected some 20 binders of evidence, including, among other things, maintenance records, training records, telemetry records, operational and testing records, and dozens of photographs. I do not feel that our investigation reflects that the mishap was a result of pilot error. And if the investigation was interpreted that way, it was misinterpreted. For any record that reflects the mishap was a result of pilot error, it should be corrected. For any publication that reflects the mishap was a result of pilot error, it should be corrected and recanted." Mr. Speaker, the problem has always been that after the Jagman report, which I just made reference to, if the Marine Corps in 2001, 2002 had issued a press release stating that new evidence has shown and proven that Colonel John Brow, pilot, and co-pilot Brooks Gruber were not at fault, Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't be on the floor today. But the Marine Corps has never, in a press release, corrected the misinformation that happened shortly after the Osprey crash when the Marine Corps' original press release indicated possible pilot error. And, Mr. Speaker, that's why all these names that I have read today have joined me in asking the United States Marine Corps, who I have great respect for, they're among the best, to give the families, Connie Gruber and her daughter Brooks, to give Trish Brow and her two sons, Matthew and Mark, one letter on the Commandant's heading on his stationery, clearly state to the Brow family that your husband, John Brow, a true American hero, was not responsible for the crash on April the 8th of 2000. The same for Connie Gruber and her daughter Brooke down in Jacksonville, North Carolina. One paragraph with the same language that I just mentioned for Colonel John Brow, the same language for Major Brooks Gruber. Mr. Speaker, I can assure you that as long as I have the privilege to serve in the United States Congress, and with all these experts that I've quoted today that are willing to join me, that the right thing must be done for the family. And the right thing is that letter from the Commandant. Mr. Speaker, I would not be the kind of person that I am without the faith that I have in my God. And my mom and dad taught me the Bible, and they taught me right from wrong, and they taught me that truth does matter. I have, with the help of God and the many experts, we have the truth. And the truth is that these two outstanding pilots were put into an impossible situation without any training to understand how to react to vortex ring state. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to speak out on the floor of the House. I have told the families that when this clarification comes through and their husbands are cleared, that I would like to go with the Brow family to Arlington Cemetery and stand there with Trish, Matthew, and Mark and salute the Colonel and say, "Colonel, rest in peace. You're not blamed for this accident any longer." I want to do the same thing with Connie Gruber down in Jacksonville, North Carolina, where her husband is buried. And I want to walk with Connie and Brooks, and I want to stand at the grave and say the same thing to Major Gruber. Rest in peace. You no longer will be blamed for the accident on April the 8th of 2000. Mr. Speaker, before closing, there's a quote that someone sent me in this 10-year journey to clear these names by Voltaire that says, "To the living we owe respect, to the dead we owe the truth." And that's what this is all about, Mr. Speaker, is the Marine Corps could issue one paragraph to the two families so that never again will they have to read in the paper the accident in Marana, Arizona on April the 8th, 2000 was due to pilot error. Because as the families have said to me, help us get this clarification and we will make sure that any print about the pilot error on April the 8th, we will ask and demand that it be retracted because it is not the truth. I ask God to please bless our men and women in uniform. I ask God to please bless the families of our men and women in uniform. I ask God in His loving arms the families who've given a child dying for freedom in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I ask God to please bless the Brow family and the Gruber family. Bring peace to this family, God, by helping us get this misinformation corrected. And I'll ask God to please bless the House and Senate that we will do what is right in the eyes of God for God's people. I will ask God to bless the President, that he will do what is right in the eyes of God for God's people. And I will ask 3 times, God please, God please, God please continue to bless America, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Okay. Gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January the 5th, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentlelady from the District of Columbia for 30 minutes.
There you go. Close enough. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've come to the floor today to inform the Congress of exciting new developments about the major priority for the District of Columbia for this year's Congress. These developments have developed very quickly, and they have developed both in the Congress and in the nation. We now have unprecedented momentum, both in the country and here in the Congress, to allow the district to spend its own local funds without coming to the Congress of the United States. That will seem very strange to members of the public, since they've never heard of a local jurisdiction having to bring its own local funds to a national legislature which had nothing to do with raising those funds. It is an anomaly whose time has passed. And I'm very pleased at the response we are getting in the Congress, and that we have gotten in a scarce, a small period of time, in less than 6 months. And we see this culminating in a poll that, in essence, blesses the momentum we are seeing in the Congress for budget autonomy for the United States. This poll was released just this week, and it's an important week for the District of Columbia because the district has celebrated Emancipation Day. The slaves in America who lived in the District of Columbia were emancipated 9 months before slaves in the United States, and there's some analogy here, my friends, because what was not emancipated was the budget of the District of Columbia. And that's what we're trying to free now, and that's what the American people seem to want by a very large majority. A poll by a polling organization that is nonpartisan called Purple Insights, using the traditional methodology that you see in all the national polls, asked this question of Americans in all parts of the country from both parties. The question was preceded with this fact: the budget of the city of Washington, D.C. is funded by local residents' tax dollars. Do you think that decisions about Washington, D.C.'s local budget should be made by Washington, D.C. taxpayers and their own elected officials, or should those budget decisions be made by the U.S. Congress? And here are the results. 71% of the American people said the D.C. budget should be decided exclusively by D.C. taxpayers. Only 23% said that decision should be made by the U.S. Congress. But what is most gratifying is the way in which these numbers reflect both parties. And they broke down these numbers and were careful to ask people from both parties. For Democrats, the notion that the budget should be decided only by local taxpayers was 71%, but independents were at 75%, and Republicans were at 72%. So no matter where my colleagues come from, their constituents support the bedrock principle: no principle more American than if you raise the money, you get to decide how to use it, and you certainly don't go to a national body. And then they looked at men and women. Men were at 68%, women at 72%, who believe that the local taxpayers should decide the local budget and be the final decision makers. And if you look at regions of the country, Mr. Speaker, you get the same kind of virtually even breakdown. If you look at the Northeast, it's 69%. You look at the Midwest, it goes up to 74%. You look at the South, it's 68%. You look at the West, it's 72%. No red-blooded American is going to say with a straight face that you can carry my budget with my money in it and ask the Congress to be the final decider on that budget. That's what this poll shows, and you can see it graphically here with red the the Republicans and the Democrats are virtually even, but more Republicans say that D.C. budget should be made by local D.C. taxpayers. That's 72%, 71% Democrats. If you look at those who oppose, the opposition shows the same breakdown. You have 24% of Democrats saying Congress should control the D.C. budget, but you have 22% of Republicans. Where's your majority here? The majority is where I think most people would have expected it, but I am grateful for a local organization called DC Vote for commissioned this poll, and it realized that the poll might come under some scrutiny, so it went to a polling organization which is known for its bipartisan reputation in polling. That, of course, should be all we need to hear. But the fact is we have a parallel development right here in the Congress. Today, Senator Joe Lieberman, not today, I'm sorry, this week, Senator Joe Lieberman announced that he was preparing his own budget autonomy bill for the District of Columbia. Now, Senator Lieberman, who works in a very bipartisan way, I must say in the Senate, I'm so sorry to see that he has decided to retire. Senator Lieberman has long been the foremost champion of equal rights for residents of the District of Columbia. This idea began with a Republican chairman, Chairman Darrell Issa. I will have something to say with how that happened. We then had two more Republican leaders, House Majority Leader Eric Cantor and the Republican governor of Virginia, Bob McDonnell, both to weigh in for budget autonomy for the District of Columbia. This week, citizens from the organization DC Vote were here in the House speaking to members about these latest poll results. But let me say something about the members, because it's the members who have the last say here. Chairman Darrell Issa is responsible for matters that come to the Congress involving the District of Columbia. That committee, since I've been here more than 20 years, has never had a hearing on the D.C. budget. He decided to have one. He listened to his witnesses, and he listened to the chief financial officer of the District of Columbia and to other District of Columbia witnesses. What he heard was that the District of Columbia had the largest budget surplus in the United States here in the middle of a recession, and that its budget and finances were in better shape than virtually any state in the United States. And he heard the witnesses from his side as well as our side, the Republican side as well as our side, objective witnesses from the outside, saying that the major problem the district faced were inefficiencies that it pays for on Wall Street, that it pays for in the way it manages the city, because its budget cannot be implemented until it is brought to the Congress of the United States. That creates huge uncertainty, of course, among bondholders and on Wall Street, and the D.C. pays a premium not of the making of our citizens for the fact that the budget does not get decided in its final form in the city. Now, I can tell you that no one can remember when the Congress of the United States has changed the budget itself. And you can imagine why. A budget is a very delicate thing to put together. And you haven't had the kind of hearings you would have here to know what to take out and what to put in and how to sew it back together again. So what's the point of bringing it over here except tradition? The chairman listened to the problems with bringing it to the Congress and heard even more problems than he expected. School begins in September. By the time Congress finishes with the budgets, even at the earliest point, you have the date September the 30th. The reasons that most jurisdictions are on a July 1st year and not a year that begins October the 1st, as the federal government does, is precisely because of the importance of schools in every jurisdiction. But in the district, our schools and our city are handicapped by the fact that the budget isn't even out by the time school opens. That impressed the chairman, apparently. And he was impressed by the fact, and I will soon get to this, that the district has faced shutdowns because its budget was here, and fights over the federal budget has resulted even in the possibility of shutdown of the D.C. government. Mr. Isis sat there and did something I've never heard a chairman of a committee do before in my time in the Congress. He listened so intently, heard so well, that he said, or announced as the hearing ended, he intended to write a bill for D.C. budget autonomy. Everyone was surprised. His staff told us they had no idea he was going to do that. He decided to do that upon hearing the witnesses at his hearing. That is, I must say to my colleagues and to members of the public, this is a civics lesson in committee work at its best. The chairman listened, the chairman makes a decision, the chairman then went to work. He worked on several versions of a budget autonomy bill and exchanged them with me, with the mayor, and with other officials in the city, and there were some problems in that exchange, and we indicated what those difficulties would be operationally. And then one day he announced his own final version of a D.C. budget autonomy bill, and I can tell you that while it has its own form that clearly bears his signature, in many ways it mirrors my own D.C. Budget Autonomy Act. You can see how much we were thrilled that the chairman of the full committee had indeed decided that it was in the best interest of the District of Columbia and the best interest of the Congress for the district's budget to remain in the district, to be implemented at the same way that the budgets of every other jurisdiction in the United States except the budget of the district are implemented. June 30th comes, July 1st they begin to implement their budget. They prepare for school, and they are ready when school begins. Mr. Isis' bill came to the attention of the President of the United States. The President had weighed in the year before for budget autonomy, but upon hearing of Mr. Isis' bill, he included in his own budget submitted this year the final language. Consistent with the principle of home rule, it is the administration's view that the district's local budget should be authorized to take effect without a separate annual federal appropriation bill. The administration will work with Congress and the mayor to pass legislation to amend the D.C. Home Rule Act to provide the district with local budget autonomy. That's the President's statement, inspired by the Republican chairman's proposal for budget autonomy. I know that there are many in this chamber and in the public who see rare instances, perhaps none, of bipartisan ideas from this Congress. There you see one. You see the Democratic president. You see a strong Republican chairman. And, Mr. Chairman, that is not all. Mr. Issa was moved in part to address budget autonomy because of the problems the district has had with federal shutdown threats. Most of America is aware of the shutdown threats. By the skin of our teeth, we barely missed a shutdown more than a year ago. Why should that have anything to do with you or with me? It had everything to do with the District of Columbia. No one believes, of course, that the underlying issues had anything to do with the District of Columbia. Those issues are well known. They involve disagreements between Democrats and Republicans over federal issues like the federal deficit. The district has long had a balanced budget, and as I indicated before, beyond its balanced budget, has the highest surplus in the United States. So why is the District of Columbia caught in a federal fight that leads to the possibility of a shutdown of the federal government? If our budget is over here, if the budget of the District of Columbia is here and has not been passed by the Congress, and it usually is not passed until, of course, all other budgets are passed, or certainly no sooner than September 30th, then the District of Columbia's local budget gets thrown in the pot with the budget of, I don't know, Health and Human Services, the Department of Defense, all of the other federal agencies that get shut down. And though there's nothing that the district can do to extricate itself from this fight, because the fight does not involve any concession that the district can make, it involves only federal issues, nevertheless the district will get shut down. There were 3 shutdown threats in 2011. And it is not the fact that we didn't get shut down that is the problem. The federal government didn't get shut down. Although I can tell you it came so close to being shut down, I don't even like to think about it. What is the problem is that every time there looks like the threat of a shutdown, the local government of the District of Columbia has to spend time and money preparing for a shutdown, whether or not it occurs. Imagine your county, imagine your city pulling people together 3 times to prepare for a shutdown, to prepare for which agencies can keep going and which agencies to shut down. Because in the event of a shutdown, the only agencies that can be kept in operation are essential agencies. 3 times the District of Columbia had to do that. The District of Columbia is going through the same problems that every local jurisdiction as we climb out of that Great Recession is having. You can imagine what a waste of time and energy that was. That was one of the issues that made Chairman Issa think through the notion of budget or autonomy. I myself had several bills in. Each year, a bill in to keep the district government from shutting down in case the federal government shuts down, and another bill that I put in each year saying whenever the federal government shuts down, the district can spend its own local funds, no other funds, no federal funds, nobody can spend those, but its own local funds. Those bills have not passed. Just 2 months ago, I warned the mayor that we could be headed for a shutdown in this year because the Senate and the House have different budgets. An agreement was reached between the two chambers under the Budget Control Act about what the level of spending would be this year, 2013. But while the Senate has stuck to that number, the House is using another number. So if the two don't agree and they each come forward with different appropriation bills, the country could be faced again with the possible shutdown of the federal government. That's bad enough for the country. But suppose you were the mayor of the District of Columbia or a member of the city council and had to consider even that there could be a shutdown of the district government over the fact that the House and the Senate are using different budget numbers this year. That would be enough to make you, I think, tremble, as I'm sure the district is now as it considers what to do. Of course, we're going to try to reach some agreement, but at the moment they're going in absolutely divergent directions, despite having reached an agreement on what the number would be for the budget this year. The President, noting these shutdown threats, the cost to the taxpayers of the District of Columbia, did something quite unusual. He not only submitted his view, as he did with budget autonomy, that he favors it, he submitted actual language that would keep the district open in case of a shutdown, and I would like to submit that language for the record. But when the President submits the language to the Congress, that puts a very special emphasis on the need for what he is asking for. Mr. Speaker, not only have you had the President and Mr. Issa, the majority leader of this body, Mr. Cantor, has indicated that he supports budget autonomy. His spokesman said, and I am quoting, that he is certainly willing to work with the district toward its goal of budget autonomy. That's the first time that a leader of my friends on the other side of the aisle have indicated public support for budget autonomy, and this afternoon I want to thank Mr. Cantor personally for doing so. Mr. Cantor may have been moved by his own governor, the Republican governor of Virginia. Mr. Bob McDonnell, or Governor McDonnell, wrote to Majority Leader Cantor, who is also a Virginian, indicating that he supports budget autonomy for the district. And one of the reasons he gave was that 100,000 Virginians come to the District of Columbia to work every day, private and federal sector. And that if the government shuts down, that 100,000 residents from Virginia who had nothing to do with this fight, just as the District of Columbia had nothing to do with the federal fight, are seriously inconvenienced. So I think the fact that these two Virginians from our region have spoken out speaks to the practical reality behind budget autonomy. In addition, the governor of Virginia made it clear he did not see how the mayor of the District of Columbia even ran his city when he could not be certain when his budget would be passed. Here you have one chief executive speaking to another, and both from different parties. The case, we think, Mr. Speaker, has been made. It's been made here by the leadership of this body and the leadership of the Senate, and it's been made in the country as leaders have stepped forward to indicate that the rational thing to do, the American thing to do, if you will, is to respect the right of a local jurisdiction to spend its own local money without coming to a national body who has had nothing to do with the raising of those funds. If I could inquire, Mr. Speaker, how much time I have remaining.
Lady has 4 minutes left.
I want to summarize how much on the same page Democrats and Republicans are on the proposition that D.C. should control D.C.'s local budget. There's nothing radical about that one, my friends. It'd be hard to go out into the street of your city or your county and get a different response. So it's not surprising, but it's very important to have these poll figures that back up where Chairman Issa is trying to take us, where Mr. Cantor is trying to take us, where the governor of Virginia is trying to take us, where D.C. officials, and I hope the Congress will come this year. These are very gratifying numbers, but they are numbers that reflect where Americans always are. They're first local people. They want to do as much locally as possible. They understand that there are national issues. They know that one of those issues is not their own local money. Mr. Speaker, this week the District of Columbia celebrated D.C. Emancipation Day, and of course it's worthy of celebration when this jurisdiction was the first jurisdiction whose slaves were freed by Abraham Lincoln. Isn't it amazing that the nation's capital had slavery in 1862? But it is very hard to celebrate an Emancipation Day for the District of Columbia when your own local funds cannot be spent by your own local people. We raise about $3 billion in this city ourselves. It is a very diverse city of people from all walks of life and all kinds of income, and there is absolute agreement across political lines that the one thing we deserve is budget autonomy. This year was the 150th anniversary of the liberation of slaves by Abraham Lincoln. In the District of Columbia, we noted that the slaves had to be very grateful to be liberated because there was nothing they could do to liberate themselves. The armed struggle was certainly not possible for slaves here or anywhere else. Peaceful opposition to slavery would have brought armed struggle against their peaceful opposition. So they had to wait to be liberated. The people of the District of Columbia understand it is up to them to liberate themselves, but they too cannot free themselves entirely. They do not have a member who has a vote on the floor of the United States Congress. I vote in committee. I do not have the right to vote for final passage of any legislation. My residents have been in every war the nation has fought since the nation was created. We pay income taxes at the highest levels. We're third per capita in income taxes among the 50 states and the District of Columbia. So you can imagine that it is with some anguish that we send our own local budget to people we respect, but people who have nothing to say with the money we have raised. I thank all of those who have supported us here in the Congress, and I look forward to the day this year when there will be budget autonomy for the District of Columbia. And I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
The chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the President of the United States.
Mr. Speaker,
Secretary.
I am directed by the President of the United States to deliver to the House of Representatives a message in writing. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January the 5th, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Brown, for 30 minutes. What's the message?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This afternoon I'm going to talk about health care. I'm a medical doctor. I'm a primary care physician. And as a medical doctor, I'm very concerned about where we're going as a nation. Back during the debate over the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, I presented several alternatives to that bill. Most people know in this country that the U.S. Supreme Court a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, had hearings about the constitutionality of the individual mandate, whether the federal government, under the Constitution, can demand that every single person in this country buy health insurance that's dictated by the federal government, that the federal government actually puts out all the parameters for that health insurance. We recently saw Kathleen Sebelius, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, say that everybody's health insurance in this country is going to have to provide free birth control pills, free pills that are designed for nothing but to cause an abortion, and free sterilization for everybody in the country. And that's whether you're male or female. And who pays for that? We all will. But, Mr. Speaker, this is not about birth control. It's about government control. Because, you see, under Obamacare, if it stays in place, it's going to be a tool where the federal government can mandate every aspect of our lives, what we eat. In fact, Justice Scalia, during the hearings a few weeks ago, said if it stays in place, couldn't the federal government demand that everybody in the country eat broccoli? I love broccoli, and I eat a lot of it. But it's not the federal government's business to mandate that I eat broccoli or anybody else for that matter. And he's absolutely right. And in fact, under the auspices of health care, the federal government could control every aspect of our lives, could tell us what kind of cars that we drive. The federal government could basically say, well, we believe everybody should drive a Chevy Volt or Ford Focus, and if you don't, we're going to fine you. There are already doctors that are associated with the CDC in my home state of Georgia that say it's a health hazard for people to have private ownership of firearms. And it's particularly a health hazard to children. They could outlaw private ownership of firearms. They could outlaw anything that the federal government decided to do. Obamacare is going to be a destroyer. It's going to destroy the doctor-patient relationship. It will destroy the quality of health care because the federal government is going to decide who can get care and who's not. It can decide whether a person is fit to receive surgery or go in the hospital or not. Age is going to be a determining factor. And it's all going to be based on economics, on cost. The high cost of health care today is because of government intrusion into the health care system. And in fact, I'll just give you two quick examples. Back when I was practicing medicine down in rural southwest Georgia, in my little office, I had a fully automated, quality-controlled laboratory. And if a patient came in to see me that had a fever, aching all over, sore red, swollen throat, coughing, nose running, I would do a complete blood count, a CBC, to see if they had a bacterial infection, which needs to be treated with antibiotics, or whether they had a viral infection, which is not helped by antibiotics. The patient does not need to go spend the money on those antibiotics. Actually, it's not the best practice. It's not a good standard of care to treat viral infections with antibiotics. I would do a CBC. I could do it in 5 minutes. I charged $12. Congress, in its infinite wisdom, decided that I might make a few pennies off doing CBCs and thus would have an incentive to do too many. Well, they passed CLIA, the Clinical Laboratory Improvement Act. So instead of being able to do the test for 5 minutes, $12, I had to send patients over to the hospital. It took 3 to 4 hours, $75 for one test, from $12 to $75, because of a law that Congress passed. What do you think that did to everybody's insurance all across this country? What do you think it did to the cost of Medicaid as well as Medicare? It markedly elevated the cost. Second issue, Congress passed and is now law HIPAA. It's a totally unneeded act. It has cost the healthcare industry alone billions with a B, billions of dollars for a totally unneeded act, and it has not paid for the first aspirin to treat the headaches it's created. And there are other industries like the insurance industry and the legal industry, the accounting industry, and a whole lot of others that are affected by HIPAA also. So it's government intrusion in the healthcare system. The President promised us that Obamacare would not cost over $1 trillion. They went through a whole lot of budgetary gimmicks to try to get it under $1 trillion. Just recently, CBO said that Obamacare is going to cost $1.75 trillion. The President promises if you have insurance and you like it, you can keep it. Nobody's going to be able to afford it. I talked to a businessman, and his insurance went up this year over last year by 43% because of the mandates in Obamacare. Hopefully the Supreme Court is going to throw out Obamacare because it's going to destroy the doctor-patient relationship and the quality of medicine. It's also going to destroy budgets, as I've already mentioned. It's very, very expensive. The expansion of Medicaid is going to destroy state budgets. The whole bill is going to destroy the federal budget and destroy our economy. And as I've already mentioned, it's going to destroy our freedom. So what's the alternative? What happens if the Supreme Court throws out Obamacare? As hopefully they will, and they should, because it's blatantly unconstitutional. Well, first thing, let me show you. This chart shows us what Obamacare is like. This is the recent chart, and this is all of the new bureaus and agencies that are created under the plan. And right in the middle is the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Kathleen Sebelius, if she's still in office a year from now, she has the potential of being the greatest tyrant to take away our freedom because of this law. We must get rid of Obamacare and replace it with something that makes sense economically. And we'll put patients and doctors in the business of making their own decisions. Well, I introduced a bill a few weeks ago called the Patient Option Act. It's H.R. 4224. And what would it do? Well, first thing, it repeals Obamacare completely. Gets rid of it, as we should. It also makes health care cheaper for everybody. It'll lower your cost of insurance, makes all health care expenses cheaper for everyone. It will provide coverage for all Americans. And also, it will save Medicare from going broke. We heard today, I heard some of my Democrat colleagues talk about Republicans want to destroy Medicare as we know it. And that's what their mantra keeps being. But their policy of the Democrat Party is characterized by 4 Ds. The first D is that they deny that Medicare and Social Security has any problem whatsoever. The actuaries of both Social Security and Medicare say they're going to go broke within just a few short years, within the lifespan of almost every American, except for the extreme elderly. So they deny there's a problem. Second thing, they're delaying fixing the problem. And their mantra of let's save Medicare as we know it is going to, they deny that there's any problem. And the third D is they're going to destroy Medicare as we know it because it's just totally not feasible to go forward and not fix it. That's what Republicans have been trying to do. And the fourth thing that my Democrat colleagues do is they demonize all of us who want to try to fix it. The Patient Option Act will fix it. And that's what we need to do. We need to have policies to give patients, give people a whole lot more options. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do with my Patient Option Act. So, how does it make it cheaper for everyone? Well, first thing it does, it provides 100% tax deductibility for all health care expenses, including insurance. What's this do? Well, most people in this country get their health insurance through their employer, at least working people do. And what this does is it allows a business to just give the money to their employees and let the employees go out and buy the health insurance that makes the most sense for them and their families. So the employer is not dictating what kind of insurance the employee gets. It's a normal business expense just to the employer to give that money to the employee, and then the employee can go out and buy whatever kind of insurance that they want to. And in doing so, they can buy health insurance across state lines. What this will do is it will get rid of all the state mandates, because somebody in Georgia could go to Ohio and buy a basic policy without the state mandates that are given to the insurance companies in Georgia. Plus, this issue breaks up the monopolies. In every state, there are only just a very few health insurance companies that are providing health insurance coverage within that state. They have tantamount to monopoly. By allowing people to work with insurance agents, they can buy health insurance anywhere in the country and can have a whole lot more options of the health insurance, those kind of insurance policies that fit their family's needs the very best at a much lower cost. And it also increases the contribution limits and does patient reforms to the health savings accounts. What my bill does is it allows everybody to contribute up to $10,000 a year into a health savings account, and the employer can help provide the funds so that the employee can fund their health savings accounts. And actually, the employee will own that health savings account, manage it themselves. Now, my Democrat colleagues seem to think that nobody can manage their own health insurance or their own economic affairs, that we have to have the federal government telling all of us how to manage all of our affairs. That seems to be their philosophy, but I trust the American people. I think people can manage their own affairs if we give them the ability to do so, and expanding health savings accounts will do just that. It's not a use it or lose it situation under the Patient Option Act either. That can continue to grow over the lifetime of the individual, and when they die, when they pass on, that health savings account will actually go into their estate and go to their heirs. So this puts competition into the health insurance industry. It takes away all those mandates, lets patients have multiple options where they can purchase the health insurance at a lower cost that makes sense for them. And their employer will not dictate it, and neither will the federal government. So it will be a whole lot cheaper for everyone. Now, it also offers coverage for all Americans. Well, in repealing Obamacare, the thing about Obamacare is we were told we need to have health care for everybody. Well, the thing is, what is confusing to most Americans is we haven't been talking about health care, we're just talking about health insurance. When Obamacare says provide health care for everybody, what they're saying is health insurance for everyone that is mandated by the federal government. In fact, the President went on a national address over TV just prior to passing Obamacare, where he said he wants everybody in this country in one pool, one insurance pool. What's that mean? That means the federal government provides all health care coverage and all health care for everybody. That's socialized medicine. Socialized medicine. And that's exactly what Obamacare is all about. It's geared towards forcing people out of their private insurance. We already see that happening today. And to force everybody into a national pool run by the federal government, which in itself is going to destroy the quality of health care. And federal bureaucrats are going to be making decisions for everybody about the kind of surgery that everybody can or cannot have, whether you can get a certain medication or not, whether you can go in the hospital or not. The doctor will not be able to make those decisions. already as a physician, as a primary care doctor, the health managed corporations as well as the government entity, CMS, determine today whether a patient can go in the hospital or not, or whether they can get a certain treatment or not. We've got to stop that. We've got to put patients in control where they can work with their doctors and get the kind of health care that they need without some bureaucrat, an insurance company bureaucrat or a government bureaucrat making the decisions. But what this does, it also allows consumers, my Patient Option Act, H.R. 4224, allows businesses or individuals to come together and form an association and have huge insurance pools all across the country. And that association could offer multiple insurance products, a Cadillac plan or bare bones plan or something in between. Whatever the members of that association wants to purchase, the association can offer multiple products. And since you'll have such huge pools across the land, then the cost is much lower. It spreads the liability across many more people, and so health insurance is a whole lot less expensive for all of us. And in doing so, it'll help cover a lot of people who are uninsured today because they can't afford it. And it'll also allow people who have pre-existing conditions to join those associations and be able to buy health insurance at a price where they can afford it. So it'll help cover those people with pre-existing conditions. And so this will allow those groups to make these associations, as well as individuals or businesses, to buy the health insurance across state lines. It will provide coverage for virtually everybody. Well, what about Medicare? And I'm going to come back to coverage for particularly poor people that can't afford insurance, even with the lower prices. And I'll tell you what the bill does, the Patient Option Act, H.R. 4224 does. But my bill will save Medicare. It'll save it from going broke and make it so that our senior citizens, not only today, but these children that I see, young people I see in the gallery today, they'll be able to have insurance in the future through Medicare if that's what they want to do. What it does is it allows seniors to opt out of Medicare if they want to. I've got a constituent that worked for a large cable company here in this country. When he retired, the cable company wanted to provide health insurance for him for the rest of his life as an executive of the cable company. But they couldn't do it. And he couldn't do it because under the current law, everybody has to go into Medicare once you turn 65, at least Part A. You don't have any option about that. It's mandated. Of course, mandates like that, I don't think that's freedom, frankly, Mr. Speaker. Everybody is mandated to go into Medicare when they turn 65. Well, my bill will allow them to say, no, I want to buy private insurance. I don't want Medicare. I don't want to be involved in it. So they can use their own insurance, whether it's provided through a company or whether it's something they've bought all along. And it moves Medicare into a more flexible program. It actually sets up a Medicare health savings account that Medicare will fund. The patient will own that health savings account, will manage the dollars. It won't be managed by some federal bureaucrat. And if the patient doesn't utilize all those funds before they pass away, those funds actually go into the Medicare recipient's estate, and the heirs will get the dollars. The Medicare recipient will control the money, will control the decisions, can work with their doctor, and it gives the Medicare recipient a lot of options. And it also gives premium support for, on top of the Medicare health savings account, so that the Medicare patient will have comprehensive coverage for any medical emergency or even very costly medical treatments. So it takes care of Medicare patients. It gives them good quality care. It puts the Medicare patient in control of those decisions, and it will save Medicare from going broke, which is going to in just a very few short years. Now, the next thing that my patient does And this will help with those poor people who can't even buy the much reduced cost health insurance, even bare bone policies. And there are, unfortunately, some people in this country that are in this category. In my over 4 decades of practice of medicine, I have literally given away hundreds of thousands of dollars of my services. That's what most doctors do, particularly in my generation. A lot of the younger doctors aren't doing that as much because of the government dictates to them and because of the requirements that CMS puts upon their practices that they don't have time to give to their patients. They don't have time to try to develop relationships with their patients. They don't have time to give good quality care anymore because of the federal government. But if somebody, and let me back up and say that if I was accepting Medicare as a physician and I was a preferred provider, that's the providers that Medicare that providers accepting Medicare as a payment. And Medicare, by the way, sets the prices, but says you cannot publish those prices. So there's no transparency because of federal dictates, by the way, federal law. If I was a preferred provider and a patient came in to see me that was really struggling, trying to make ends meet, they didn't have health insurance, they're trying to pay their bills, and they came in to see me, and I said, don't worry about the bill. And I've done that to thousands of patients over my 4 decades of practice in medicine. I said, don't worry about it. Forget it. I'm glad to give you these services for free. If I did that and was a preferred provider, Medicare could literally throw me in jail for treating somebody for free. They could throw me in jail. They could fine me. Doctors today cannot give away their services to somebody who needs desperately to get their services. So what my bill does is stops that, and it gives a physician a tax credit between $2,000 and $8,000 a year for giving away their services. Gives them a tax credit. I talked to a lot of doctors throughout Georgia and asked them, if we did this, how many doctors would actually see patients for free? Every single one in every single doctor's meeting has held up their hands. And I'll give you an example. I talked to a urologist who basically practices in a very upscale, wealthy community. He's in his office 4 days a week, has basically, it's a retirement community with high-priced real estate and homes. And he told me if I would do this in a bill, he would set aside 2 of the 4 days he's in his office to see nothing but indigent patients. Let me repeat that. This doctor who's working in this area will give half of his time to see an indigent patient in his office if we would just give him this tax credit. And that's what we did in this bill. So that doctors no longer are under the threat of being fined and being jailed for just having compassion on poor people, as the federal government has stopped that, prevented that, said it's against the law to have compassion on poor people. You have to charge them. You have to try to collect. You cannot give away your services. This stops all that. Medicare has no compassion. Medicaid has no compassion. It's all about money and government control. Another thing that my bill does is it reforms EMTALA, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act. This is another law that Congress passed that requires every emergency room in this country to see whoever comes in and to treat them. In my area in Georgia, throughout my 10th Congressional District in Georgia, a person can walk into any emergency room in my district and they'll find the emergency room filled with patients who do not need to be in the emergency room, should not be in the emergency room. I worked for 2 years before I moved to northeast Georgia. I was working at a hospital down in southwest Georgia as a director of emergency services. For 2 years, I worked full-time as an ER doc and directing those emergency services. Way over 90% of the patients that came in that emergency room, as they do in most emergency rooms, had no emergency. And actually, emergency rooms all across this country are filled with illegal aliens that are going there and getting services, utilizing the emergency room in the hospital as their primary care provider. In other words, they're going to see doctors in the emergency room for stumped toes, or colds, sore throats, headaches, any medical problem. And they don't have to pay because of EMTALA. Federal government has required the emergency rooms to treat everybody who walks in, whether they can pay or not, whether they're here legally or not, whether they're a citizen or if they're an illegal alien. It requires it to do so. And what's happening with this, within EMTALA, there's a tremendous economic burden upon hospitals. We have hospitals, particularly rural hospitals, going broke today so that nobody in their community gets services because of EMTALA. It's not fair. It's not fair to the people in that community. It's not fair to people who really need to be in the emergency room. It's not fair, particularly, that we are forcing emergency rooms and hospitals to see illegal aliens. It's not fair that actually it's hurting people who have true emergencies because emergency rooms are filled with people who don't need to be there. And people can come in with severe injuries or severe medical problems. If it's not blatantly apparent, then people have delayed administering treatment that they desperately need to keep them well or to save their lives. What my bill does is it allows hospitals to set up a basic screening process so that the hospital can set up somebody with basic medical knowledge and can screen patients and say to the patient, this is not an emergency, go see your doctor, go to a free clinic, we can't see you. So it reforms EMTALA and makes it so that hospitals don't have this economic burden that's been placed on them because of federal law and federal dictate. Well, I presented this bill to a lot of groups. And in fact, I'm very pleased that I did an interview with Forbes magazine recently. And they wrote up a blog in this article about my health care bill, the Patient Option Act, H.R. 4224. They said this, and this is a quote, now a new plan has come forth, backed by one of the most influential Tea Party groups that I'll mention in just a second, that contains some intriguing and original ideas for bringing cheaper health care to more people. This is from Forbes magazine. Brown's plan would revolutionize the insurance market by incentivizing companies, particularly smaller ones and startups, to pay their workers directly in wages so that the wage earner will control their own money. They're earning it. They should get it. And they should make their own health care insurance decisions themselves. And it'll let the company pay the workers directly their wages and let those workers decide how to pay for their own care. Forbes magazine. It's not a Tea Party magazine. It's a magazine that I think most Americans know. The Tea Party group, which is, a lot of people don't understand Tea Parties and what it's all about, but FreedomWorks is a grassroots group, and it's been dubbed a Tea Party group. Actually, FreedomWorks has been around for some time. But FreedomWorks has endorsed my Patient Option Act. And this is what they said. Congressman Brown has authored a bold, timely, and principled plan that offers exactly what a majority of Americans want, a patient-centered health care, so that patients can make their own decisions along with their doctors. It makes health care cheaper for everybody. It provides coverage for all Americans, and it will save America from going broke, Medicare from going broke. Americans need to contact their senators and congressmen, and the leadership of the House and Senate demand that we pass the Patient Option Act, H.R. 4224. And with that, I will yield back. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman's time's expired. Members should not refer to occupants of the gallery.